Today we would very much like to discuss a little bit about one chapter in the book called Terminology, and in particularly one figure, which is figure 4.1, which shows our ideas and our view about how stresses should be termed in these days. This is a part in the book where we had quite many discussions, Arno and myself, because historically the issue about terminology of stresses has been dealt with since the beginning of the last century. And one of the contribution came from Jagger and Cook, another contribution came from our latest version of the book I did together with Bernard Amadei, that came out in 1997. After that, it hasn't been very much discussed, but we bring it up again in this new textbook. So Arno, maybe we should describe then what is the idea about our terminology for stresses?
Yeah, why don't we show the student the figure 4.1 from the textbook and go through some of these issues mentioned there in terms of pictograms. So as you can see here in the pictogram A1, our rock stresses are divided into primary in-situ stresses and structural stresses. This is the first major division, to divide the stresses into primary and structural stresses.
Yeah, this with the structural stresses was something that Jagger and Cook brought up in their history about rock stresses.
That's right, you know. It got lost that later versions, like in Engelder, nobody took care of structural stresses anymore, but it was mentioned in the 1979 edition of Jagger and Cook. And I thought it's worth to put it back into the rock stress terminology, because it makes a clear cut between these in-situ and structural stresses. But as in your book, in the Green Book 1997, you had the perturbed in-situ stresses, which is also very important to show the people the difference between the primary and the secondary state of in-situ stresses. But this is also true for structural stresses, meaning that now we have to discuss structural stresses and perturbed structural stresses, like shown here as a sheared cavity.
Yeah, what you see there is a circular tunnel that's been sheared off. So, if you go to the next sort of row in the diagram about the gravity and tectonic stresses, what do you like to make the reader aware of on these stresses?
The most debatable stress on level 2 is, from our discussions, A3, the residual remnant stresses. We had no problems with the terminology gravitational stress, tectonic stress, and terrestrial stresses, but we had lots of debates concerning the residual and remnant stresses, because you can put them as an extra pictogram at the second level, or you can also put it at a later stage as part of the tectonic stresses.
Yes, and in particular the ones related to the third order or later grades of or groups of tectonic stresses, correct?
Yeah, the very last level, it's a new one, because it's now the third level of tectonic stresses, which was initiated, I think, in 1992 by Mary Lou Zoback, the first order and second order tectonic stresses. and at a later stage, in 2007, added by Oliver Heidbach, the third order tectonic stress at fault scale, which was coming out in a tectonics paper.
Yeah, and all these three pictograms at the bottom level is very much related to the work made by the World Stress Map. And the World Stress Map project as a part of the International Lithosphere Program originally. And this, of course, has made a major contribution to our understanding of the state of stress in the Earth's crust.
That's right. And we had a debate whether to reproduce level 3 as part of level 2 tectonic stress, but in this hierarchical order we put it as a separate higher hierarchical order at the level 3, but one should remind that shown here is due to the terminology A21 as part of the tectonic stress, the first order tectonic stress, showing at plate scale, meaning thousands of kilometer stresses in the lithosphere, while the second order tectonic stress is shown as a isostatic scale, meaning hundreds of kilometers, and the third order tectonic stress at fault scale. And at this scale, you know, the circle is close to go back to the first order hierarchical level, where we have structural stresses, where also faults are shown as a type of anisotropy. So one can state that this is not the end of the whole story, but it might continue for a while.
I'm sure it will continue for a long, long, long time before we have resolved all the problems in the relationship